Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Perrone, and I'm the president and owner of SchoolWorks, and we're excited to be welcoming all of you to join us in this conversation about the Return to School Roadmap. And I am just going to pause for a moment before I welcome our distinguished guests as everyone starts to funnel into the webinar and log in. Got about 125 people online at this point. Still watching those numbers climb. Alrighty, we are up to about 150 participants, and while we're expecting quite a few more, in the interest of time, I'm going to begin with introductions since this is a short time frame that we have here. Again, my name is Kim Perrone, and I'm the president and owner of SchoolWorks. We're an educational consulting company based in Massachusetts. However, we provide a variety of supports to state departments of education, city school districts, individual schools, charter school authorizers, and also a range of partners that support education reform efforts around the country. I'm joined by two distinguished guest speakers today. We've got Juliette Heinze from Opportunity Labs and Dr. J. Scott Cascone from the West Orange Public Schools. And I'd like to invite the two of you just to say hello very quickly, and then we'll jump right into our questions.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us, Kim and SchoolWorks.
Kim, thanks so much. SchoolWorks, appreciate the opportunity. And Cricket, good to see you again, and glad to be with you here today to chat a bit.
Likewise.
Great, thank you so much. So just to give everyone an overview as to how this is going to work, we've got about half an hour today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to facilitate the conversation to start us off between Cricket and Dr. Cascone. You're free to post some questions in the Q&A section, and our team from SchoolWorks will funnel those over to us. We'll summarize them and get in as many as we can at the end of the session. We've left a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So as we're talking, if a question occurs to you or you're wondering about something, please feel free to submit that question into the Q&A section. It'd be helpful if you also list your organization and where you're located so we have that context. And we will share all of the resources, including a link to the recording of this webinar later after the webinar concludes, either later this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. So with that being said, let me jump in a little bit and ask Cricket the first question, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about Opportunity Labs and the origin of the Return to School Roadmap?
Sure. So Opportunity Labs is a nonprofit, and it was founded and is led by Andrew Buer, who was the former Chief Operations Officer of the New York City Department of Education, and Dr. Mario Ramirez, who is an emergency physician in Nashville on the front lines as we speak, and was the acting director of pandemic and emerging threats under the Obama administration. I bring them up because their expertise made it so that Opportunity Labs was uniquely positioned to do this work really thoughtfully. So in March, when everything started unfolding, they brought together a group of public health and education experts to create the roadmap. The roadmap is a set of essential actions to help district and school leaders to prepare for a safe, efficient, and equitable return to school. And what has been so valuable about it so far is its comprehensiveness, in that it really looks at education, health, leadership, and operations from a systems perspective, while also providing tactical guidance.
Great, thank you so much. There is a link to the roadmap in our chat box, and I've also brought it up here on my screen so you can take a look at the different components of it and get a sense of how it's organized. Before we dive more deeply into the content of the roadmap, however, I thought it would be helpful if Dr. Cascone just shared a little bit about the context in which he's been working in West Orange, maybe talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has affected your community and the response from your districts to date.
Sure, Kim, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it could spend hours, talking about both how it's impacted the community and what our response has been, but I'll just kind of give what I consider to be a few salient points. A bit about our community. We're a suburban community about 10 miles outside of New York City. We're a relatively large school district as far as New Jersey is concerned, of about 8,000 students, 11 schools. We are a diverse school district, racially, ethnically, linguistically, and socioeconomically. And obviously that brings with it, some not unique challenges, because I know that there are many districts that are wrestling with the same challenges we are, but I think it's just relevant in terms of what our response has been and continues to be. We are a community that's been relatively significantly impacted by the virus insofar as a public health crisis, with over 700 cases and approximately 150 fatalities within our community. And so that's from an emotional standpoint, but also just from a emergency management standpoint. I mean, that's been very relevant. I don't want to go over what I would imagine is very common ground in terms of challenges we're facing, because I think many school districts are facing the same ones. And so I thought I would just kind of tease out a few, which for me have been kind of particularly interesting. I think communication. In other words, what this has shown us is that that we haven't typically been reaching each and every one of our households with our communications, and so we've had to really understand how we do that. Now that we're presented with a situation where it's imperative that we ensure that every household is getting the messages that we're sending out. So there's been a real learning curve, a positive learning curve as far as that goes. There's been much spoken about the access to technology, which is certainly continues to be an issue in many communities. We've bridged that gap in giving out, distributing over 1,000 Chromebooks, several hundred personal Wi-Fi hotspots to families. But what we're finding is that there's the regard of staff comfort level and parent comfort level and literacy with computer usage, and how can we work with parents to upskill them to be more knowledgeable, capable partners in supporting instruction in the household. Obviously, something we've known about is continuing to usher in an instructional paradigm shift in public schools and raising the overall comfort level and capacity of staff members to facilitate blended learning experiences. It's been a crash course for a lot of folks. I think that's been one of the unexpected benefits of it. It has sort of kind of moved the profession out of this inertia and really required folks to pick up skills that had been needed and now are needed even more. Mm. And I think what it's shown is that while there's been a school of thought emerging that questioning the importance, the relevance of the institution of public education in our society, I think that while it has shed light on how we need to adapt and change as an institution, I think it's only further reinforced the absolute essential nature of the institution of public education in our society, because it's much more than just a hub of academic services, but it's rather a multi-dimensional hub through which and by which our students, parents receive mental health services, obviously socialization, nutritional services, in addition to academics. So again, I think in as much as it's shown us how we need to change moving forward, it has really solidified in my mind the importance and the essential nature of this institution in our society.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting because as we, return our attention to the return to school roadmap, there are so many components that touch upon the social emotional supports and other supports students, their families, and even staff members might need as we start to think about interacting with those communities in a different way and moving toward what might be a new normal in the future. So Cricket, could you walk us through a little bit around how the roadmap is organized and, you know, the different components of it and why you felt it was essential to include all of these?
So as you can see on the screen, and anyone can access this on the internet, there are 7 different big buckets, and they are governance, staff and student wellness, K-12 instruction, post-secondary success, facilities, operations, and technology. And then within each of those big buckets, we've laid it out so that for districts and school leaders, there are essential actions that they can think about when they're planning and prioritizing to take now, to take in the weeks before schools open and when schools reopen. We've learned a lot about timelines since then, and they're shifting every day as we're all watching. But again, like it has brought, for me, Kim, what you were just saying, it's brought up for me there are so many issues, and as Scott was saying, that go way beyond academics. That there are issues ranging from, yes, how are we going to look at where our kids are in terms of their academic and social emotional well-being when we get back, to like, how are we going to make sure that the supply chain is intact so we have hand soap in all the schools? And Scott is someone on the front lines dealing with all these issues all the time. But we really wanted to lay these out so that this can be used as a tool for districts to refer to. And obviously it's not exhaustive or prescriptive, but it's really in how that tool is used and how it comes to life.
Yeah, which brings me to my next question for Dr. Cascone, which is, you know, as a district leader, how do you envision folks within your team and your building leaders using this or potentially using this moving forward?
Yeah, so I think that when we look forward to September, and the way in which the directives and the guidelines have been coming from the federal and state level, I think it's safe to say, while we would like to think that we will have a substantial advance notice for September of exactly the paradigm we're going to be with which we're going to be working, I think the likelihood of that is pretty low, meaning that, you know, we will likely well into August potentially still not be exactly sure what it'll look like. And so that puts all planners in the unenviable task of really having to plan for 2 paths, 2 contingencies contemporaneously. And so what I would suggest is that when you look at this map, is really kind of first kind of teasing out which ones are valid and relevant regardless of which of those paradigms we end up operating in, because I think those are ones which we can begin working on in the short term because they're not dependent upon the paradigm, and some will have to be adjusted later once we know what we're dealing with. And so really kind of sorting and just kind of taking stock of this. And when I first became aware of the work and I reviewed it, it immediately, you know, kind of struck me as really, really constructive for being a helpful framework, a scaffold that leaders and staff members and districts could use to really just start framing out the conversation. Because what I see a lot of is that there's a lot of spinning of wheels, right? Like when we start to think about these things, because we don't really know what the end game is. We don't know when the end game is. And so what this does is it provides some structure and a scaffold to that conversation. And I would argue it lends to a more constructive, productive conversation about both short-term and long-term planning.
Right. I can imagine that, you know, there's a lot in here. And some of the things that I love about this roadmap are some of the things that I think might be challenging and overwhelming to personnel who are working with it. You just talked about all the things that you need to go over, and there's so much in here. It's like almost like, where do you start, right? So I was clicking through earlier through the wellness section, and this time I'll go into instruction. And we can see that, you know, for each one of these buckets, there's a due first, a due before school open section, and do when schools are open and operating. And then you've got these tabs over here that, you know, are directed at district leaders, but then there's also the school leader side, right? Again, do first, do before school opens, and do when schools are open and operating. And there's so much content here. Have you all started to think about how you might help district and school leaders prioritize or do a needs assessment and figure out where's the entry point? Like, where do we start here? Because you can't do everything, right? You got to start somewhere.
So, Kim, I can tell you that Opportunity Labs is now working with a handful of states. And one of the states that I just started working with is taking 3 of the buckets and developing working groups to dive into those and identify key issues and come up with recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So like Scott said, they're using it as a framework, as a scaffold for a way to have these conversations. But again, it's going to be the interpretation of these. So we've set up a series of meetings over the course of the next 6 weeks with these working groups. And then they will tailor it to what their needs are. And then, as Scott said, then it will go to districts and schools, and it will be up to interpretation. And there will still be some things that are vague, obviously, and we are still learning every day. I mean, that's the hard part of this for all of us, right? Just as citizens, as parents, is there's a lot of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to work with those groups in terms of having guiding principles about we will be transparent, we will have equity as a priority, we will listen to one another, and we will make hard decisions. But it really is, it really is overwhelming, but it is going to take people getting into this and bringing it to life.
Right. What about, because everything is so uncertain, what are your thoughts currently around things like the possibility of opening schools in the fall and then experiencing some resurgences of infection in certain areas and having to kind of fluidly transition between being in a brick and mortar setting or some version of that, and transitioning kind of fluidly to the situation that we're in right now, which is distance or remote learning, and going through kind of a stay-at-home situation again. How do you anticipate, and maybe Dr. Cascone is in the best position to answer this, how do you anticipate managing your district through that challenge?
Well, I mean, the good news on that one is now we have a precedent for it, right? So we've done that once, but at least we've done it once. And so, believe it or not, I would argue the less complicated aspect of that is really the organizational, procedural aspects. The challenge is really on the social, emotional, and family side. Because it's, they have to kind of pivot and transition and shift into a different reality. And I would argue that, that's really where the challenges come in. I mean, I do believe that the virtual piece will continue in some way in the upcoming school year. So I don't envision that we're going to kind of put that aside. Whether we're back in school or not, I think what the value and the upside of what we've seen with having that virtual piece will continue for a variety of reasons and ways. And maybe that's just simply snow days, or maybe it's homebound instruction, or whatever the case may be. So I think that component is here to stay in some iteration. But I think for next year in particular, because it's very difficult to imagine now that we will have students coming back en masse, all schools in the school at one time. And I'm only basing that on where we are presently with the medical and the scientific situation. And if that's in fact the case, then what we would envision is that it would continue to be some sort of a blended approach, whereby students were not necessarily in school every day, but had access to on-site direct instruction for part of the day or for just certain days. And then on those other days, the virtual would continue. But we have precedent for it. So now we know how to kind of change gears as far as that goes. But again, I'll be honest with you, in the public education profession, we have not been particularly good, nimble at solving complex challenges. And the problem is, and the reason that is because we haven't been particularly strategic or consistent over time in the way we've addressed them. What I think we've learned that lesson. What makes this difficult is, and it could say, well, we'll put people together in groups and so on and so forth. But when we look and we try and identify our problem, we try to identify our strategic objectives, we don't have a clear end game in mind. And that makes this very, very complex task that much more complex. But it's again, I think it's really planning for two contingencies contemporaneously, which is double the work, but it'll need to be done.
Yeah. To that end, as you enter this, or you're probably deep into the school budgeting season, what kinds of contingencies are you planning for when it comes to managing your budget?
Well, yeah, I mean, the financial landscape within public education has been problematic for a long time, and certainly in New Jersey, since federal legislation was passed back in 2008, which capped the percentage tax levy that a district, and you know what, I don't necessarily disagree with it, because we can't continue to burden the taxpayers inordinately. So we've been dealing with that. What's now going to compound that situation is that the state governments and the local governments are going to be down revenue, and we could be experiencing a loss of state aid between the beginning of our fiscal year on July 1st and the beginning of the state's fiscal year, which now has been backed up to September 30th. So we could be presented with cuts of upwards to $5 or $6 million, and we won't know the definitive numbers on that until the state's budget presentation on August 25th, though we may have some foreshadowing of what it is. We have, on the back end of our budget, have developed some contingencies whereby we could absorb some unexpected costs that come our way. We recently received word that we're going to be gaining $750,000 in additional revenue under Title I through the federal COVID CARES Act, which will obviously help. But when you think about the fact that some of the videos that I've been watching relative to return to school protocols in some countries like China, where that's already happening, and they're talking about students being equipped with 10 masks a week. And we understand that there are families within our community that would not be able to afford those. And so we're talking about buying 10 masks per student, let's call 1,000 students, which could be upwards of $1.6 million a year just for the masks. And so I think that's where, this theoretical and the practical mesh, and we have to be more aware of that in terms of what's really practical from a fiscal standpoint in terms of our return to school. But we have built in some contingencies on the back end of our budget to account for unexpected costs, but we could very well see some additional cuts coming down the path between now and when we actually open up in September.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in from some of the participants, so I'm just going to shoot them at you kind of rapid fire style, and we'll see how it goes. And the first one is for Cricket. Does the roadmap come in a PDF format, or is it just online?
It is online. It can be, there are a couple buttons on the side there. Oh no. Kim, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can.
Kim, can you hear me? Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
There are a couple buttons on the side there where it can be shared. But no, it's not in a PDF format.
Not PDF. Okay, great. Couple of other questions. Let's see. One of the questions from the participants is regarding whether or not this would be appropriate for a private school, and whether or not there should be any adjustments they should consider about within the private setting.
I mean, yes, I think it would be completely, I don't have a ton of experience myself with private school, but all these buckets pertain to any school setting. And like we said before, it comes down to local leaders really taking this and digging into it and making it come to life.
Right.
I would just add to that you know, private schools have a greater degree of latitude, you know, not being beholden to the many state imposed mandates to, if this were to go on in the long term, to really maybe you know, reimagine you know, you know, what the school day, what the curriculum you know, really looks like, to have it be more compatible with this new format of learning, whereas in public education we don't necessarily have that kind of freedom.
Right. Okay, thank you. Another question is about parent and family participation in preparing for the new normal. What role can and will parents play in this new situation? Is there a more formal role that they can play? They said that they've become an essential piece and in the instructional process, but have little to no role in the planning and feedback process. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how parents work in partnership with a district to, you know, accommodate for the new situation we all find ourselves in.
Well, is that for me, Kim?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Right. So, you know, my doctoral work was specifically, you know, within the, you know, the conceptual framework of parent involvement, specifically Joyce Epstein's typology. And so, and, you know, by and large, we really continue to fall short within public schools, you know, even outside of the pandemic, to really actively and meaningfully engage parents in the process. And so there's no question that if we move forward with this for any prolonged period of time, that we're really, one of the focuses over the summer will really be how can we expand upon that, you know, developing certainly any of our stakeholder committees or planning groups will absolutely have parents on them, you know, to move forward with our preparations. I think we would be looking at providing professional learning over the course of the summer through online formats, a lot of resources as we kind of unpack what have been some of the greatest challenges for parents. How can we provide them with training and resources over the summer to enable them to feel more comfortable and capable to be active partners? Because there's no question that's a necessary piece of this, and we recognize the inherent challenge in that, like in any learning group, which this would be, is that we have a tremendous heterogeneity of perspective, of existing capacity that we would have to kind of address in that, but that would absolutely be a focus of some of our planning.
Great.
Kim, I just
want to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that I've been thinking a lot about this too, in terms of how school leaders, state leaders, district leaders, school leaders, parent leaders can really start to build trust and empathy in their school communities. And Scott is really an exemplar of this. If you're not following him on social media, go find him, because he's using one of the tried and true methods, which is communication. And the communications are so personable and so thorough. And it says, this is what we're doing now, and this is what we're going to do. And they're very reassuring and honest as well.
Sometimes I even sing. Yeah,
he's
that happens.
Well, I'm following just for that.
Yeah, no, you should. But he's really done such a stellar job of building community. And the more I dig into this, we know next year's not going to be normal, right? Sometimes I feel like I'm the messenger. My friends don't want to hear me talk about it, but it's going to be hard, and we're going to make mistakes. And unless we bring our school communities together, I think it's just, you know, this could really splinter us, or we can take this as an opportunity to come together around this. Because like you said, parents are seeing a different window into their child's schooling. No matter how involved they've been in the past, this is different. So we really want to leverage that knowledge. I'm a parent myself, you know, I fall into these different roles when I'm at home and at work. But I think the building community piece is going to be so essential to embarking on this journey, whether schools reopen or don't, or close and open next year.
Well, I've got one more question for the two of you, and then we'll sign off. And that is really about exploring the role of school nurses in all of this. And, you know, they have a unique, if you think about, you know, leveraging the skills, abilities, knowledge of different stakeholders like parents, school nurses are uniquely positioned because they are also at the intersection of wellness and, you know, student learning, not just social emotional learning, but academic learning as well, and thinking about the community in its entirety. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts about how school nurses can support this work.
Yeah, well, I've always, you know, as a principal, you know, now as a superintendent, I've always valued the school nurses tremendously in terms of what they bring to the table. They, you know, they're kind of in a league all by themselves as the, you know, as the medical professionals on staff. I may be the chief school administrator, but you know, my opinion does not overrule the opinion of the school nurse when it comes to medical matters. So they play a very key role, and they will obviously play a very key role in our planning. You know, one of the pieces I foresee is, you know, when we talk about professional development and training, are there trainings and professional learning in which they'll need to engage over the summer, but clearly they will need to be equity partners in the discussions as it relates to, you know, returning back to school and any kind of medical protocol that are necessary. We will absolutely be soliciting their feedback and input relative to equipment, feasibility of procedures, and the like.
Great. Cricket, anything to add?
I just want to say to our PDF friend, there is a way to print.
Great.
So there's a print button up there.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who joined us today, and those of you who submitted questions that we didn't get to. We've definitely got them all documented, and we're going to get creative to see if there are ways that we can get you some additional information and share, continue to share and keep the conversation going in the future. So please don't hesitate to email me. My email address is up here on the screen, as well as our organization's website. You can also follow us on social media at SchoolWorks LLC on all the major channels. So a recording of this webinar, as I mentioned, will be shared on our website and on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe there. Jen Strock from our team will also be sending out the follow-up communication with a link to today's recording and all of the related resources. And after today's session, you'll also get a feedback survey. Please take the time to answer. It's very brief, but we truly believe that feedback is a gift at SchoolWorks, and so we would really value any thoughts that you have about what worked really well on today's discussion, what we could improve for future discussions, and any ideas for future topics that you might have. And then finally, on behalf of SchoolWorks and all of our participants, I just want to thank you, Cricket and Dr. Cascone, for sharing your time and your insights with us today. We really appreciate your wisdom and leadership in this work. I know it's hard work and it's truly valued. So thank you both very much, and to thank you to everyone who's joined us.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, bye-bye. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, Scott.